Can you see my screen, Kelly?
Yeah.
Okay, yay, thank
Yes,
you.
sorry, I couldn't get
It's
my
okay.
mic
Thank
to
you for
turn
whoever
on.
responded. It's most appreciated. Alrighty. So hello, celebrating joy, culturally sustaining practices and centering BIPoc narratives in children's literature and art. I'm Flavia, and I'm really glad to spend time with you today. I started thinking about how I would start a keynote address to a whole bunch of librarians and people who love books. And I thought, well, I should talk to you about the books that kind of made me who I am. So here I go there. Let me press OK. So the books from my childhood that I think will help frame a lot of what I'm going to talk about today about seeing self and joy was very intentional. Both my parents are educators, so they intentionally gave me many books like those, like Her Stories, African-American folk tales, fairy tales, and true tales. My love of art was fostered there. My joy of illustration started with books and making notes and gift giving and creation. So the book and the illustrations were everything to me. Most people don't believe me, but I was very shy when I was little. So for me, books were a safe haven, but mainly the illustrations. Reading took me a longer journey. But looking at books has always, picture books has been my love. I think that's why art history made so much sense for my life. So I just wanted to touch upon that. The Jolly Old Postman, I loved the idea of opening each letter and each note and reading them to my dolls. The mitten, the entire illustration just sticks out in my head. And then to become a parent, to want to share some of these books with my children has been a really wonderful process. Let's see. Oh, and the Hamsters opera definitely formed my love of the performing arts. So this is sort of the beginnings of me. And where I saw myself in books and oftentimes where I didn't. And I'm going to really spend time talking about that, being seen and seen. That also means I need to talk about books that changed my life as a young reader. The three books I can strongly say changed the course of my world were these that I met as a teenager. So when I was about, I want to say 15 or 16, I read Octavia Butler for the first time, The Parable of the Sower. I read Margaret Atwood, The Handmaid's Tale, and I read How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accents. Each of these helped me understand and form my identity. And so when we're talking about being culturally responsive or culturally relevant or culturally sustaining, there's lots of words there. But what it comes back to is this, in a sense, a trifecta. It's this ability to see ourselves projected or see ourselves inside of a story, to care about learning, right? So receiving these as a student. Two of these I received as a student. One of them I received from home. But at the time, the course I was in was actually my father's course. So I was in a course with tons of other students at a school reading these books. The class was called Utopian and Dystopian Literature. So this attempt to develop cultural competence means for all learners inside of our environment and to increase the critical consciousness of that individual. All those three are needed to really be culturally sustaining, as Gloria Lanston Billings tells us, and I'll delve into her in a little bit. But the parable of the sower, for me, identity, faith, those themes I think resonated deeply with me. Adaptability and change. As a young person, I think change is the only thing we know, and our bodies, our worlds are changing so rapidly that book just changed me, and especially caring about the environment and understanding my role in it. Margaret Atwood, The Handmaid's Tale. I knew it as a book first, so it was very interesting when the film finally came out. But for me, gender identity, concepts of power dynamics, the heteropatriarchy, all those things came to life. The human body. Banned Books Week just happened, and I'd like to tell a whole bunch of librarians that I went to a trivia night and I won third place there, and I was very proud of the banned books that I knew. And then How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accents by Julia Alvarez is equally just, that changed me. I read that, I want to say, at 13 years old. So that was the first one. So it's kind of out of order. But I mention this book for the sake of seeing oneself in a piece of literature. So I'm first generation on one side. My mom's from Mexico City, and then my father's a Black American. So for me, the themes and the entire storyline of thinking about assimilation and identity and gender and power and familial tension in these moments was so comforting because it was so real. It was a lived experience, a mirror, so to say, into my life. Alrighty, so these words that we're using that we need to define and understand. Culture sustaining pedagogy. Culture sustaining pedagogy is a strengths-based instructional approach that centers and sustains the cultural and linguistic identities, experiences, and ways of knowing diverse students, families, caregivers, and communities. That's a little bit different than what we'll call culturally relevant pedagogy, but they all work together, and all this centers the work and the things I'm going to spend time talking about today. So based on Gloria Lanston-Billings' culturally relevant pedagogy framework, it's the approach to teaching and learning that facilitates the achievement of all students by recognizing that culture is a powerful force in shaping how we see ourselves and the world around us. And when I'm referring to culture, so often when we think about multiculturalism and that movement to then moving to now the words culturally relevant, that difference is that multiculturalism often focused on a surface level concept of culture. So think about it like a tree, that in the idea that it wasn't really going to the roots of understanding culture, it was talking about the tops of the culture. So the idea of just food being a way to understand culture, or music or art, these very simple, faceted ways of seeing it, not digging deep into why a culture is, or how a culture can be expressed, as in the beliefs, the deeper concepts of gender that can often exist depending on someone's culture. So I like to use, for example, because it's from my culture. So when we talk about Day of the Dead or Dia de los Muertos, so often people are like, oh yeah, sugar skulls, let's do it. I have nothing against a sugar skull, but if you're only talking about sugar skulls and candy, you're not actually digging in deep to the cultural significance of that holiday, right? The cultural significance of that holiday is talking about ancestry, it's talking about family, it's talking about understanding mortality, and it's very beautiful. And the storytelling that exists, the oral history, that tradition that exists inside of the cultura, inside the culture. So when I think of books, I think about this beautiful ability, especially as an arts educator, to pair a book with then the creative process. So that would be the difference of the roots versus the top. I love books, and I'm always about citing my sources. It's a big part of who I am, especially I think my museology training. So this is Gloria Lanston-Billings. So often we hear the names of different people and we don't know and who they are or their face. So this is she. She's the person who has changed so radically the way in which we work with our students, the way that we are trying to push education forward to think about how we serve everyone. So why? The approach recognizes that culture is a dynamic set of values, beliefs, and practices that varies across students' social identities. That means in relation to gender, sexuality, disability or ability, right? Socioeconomic status, geographical location, and time periods, right? So this understanding of who we are in relation to things and who our students are. To assume that our students know nothing is, right, a little bit Mm. I'll venture to say ridiculous. Of course, they come in with knowledge, right? Every student comes in with knowledge. I come very much so from that perspective that, like, I am not the all-knowing being who's like dropping knowledge into your head, right? That banking system that often Paulo Freire talks about, right? Freire talks about how we need to meet our students and understand it's a mutual exchange, as well as with culturally responsive teaching, that we and our students both are in community together and that we're learning from each other. And we can't do this work without delving into our own culture and our own understanding of that. Why? Because it fosters a beautiful sense of belonging. And so often we are thinking about books and our libraries are learning spaces as these places for belonging, where educators can adopt culture sustaining pedagogies so that culturally, linguistically diverse students might leave the learning environment feeling a sense of pride in themselves and that they belong to the school or to that community and have access to meaningful post-secondary pathways. It's not just right that we build someone who can read, we build someone who has a love of reading and sees themselves or has seen themselves in a book and wants to seek out the next piece, whether that's in fantasy, whether that's in, a biography, whatever it may be. Joy. Joy is essential. And I find this is very important when we talk about culturally sustaining practices and delving deeper. So often, since the second rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, since talking about humanizing Blackness, so often a response is to want to tell the most difficult or painful stories. Now, I'm not saying not to tell the stories, but be aware and age appropriate where the stories are going. So when we're talking about our earliest learners, our youngest, joy is essential. They need joy. They need to see the most beautiful facets of life and existence because the real world is right outside. Those tragedies are happening right in their communities. It's near home so often, right? It's not this far away concept, or it's not a wardrobe into Narnia where they're stepping. It's outside the front door where so often they're seeing themselves dehumanized, seeing their life not valued, and seeing scary things. So joy is this beautiful opportunity, I think, for the library and for books to play a vital role into, I think, what Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop really talks about. Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, I'm a fangirl. I'm very sure many of you are familiar with her, but she centers my work inside of arts education, and I really needed to call her into space and time. She says, when children cannot find themselves reflected in the books they read, or when the images they see are distorted, negative, or laughable, they learn a powerful lesson about how they are devalued in the society which they are a part of. So Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop talks about the importance of mirrors, windows, and sliding doors. And when I think about a book provides oftentimes storybooks, right? We have illustrations inside there, the same way that they are wonderful vehicles to talk to young children about art making. So often, especially when I taught elementary school, I'd always have a children's book with me because the illustrator themselves had beautiful things to offer, and we could just talk about that illustrator and what they created, or then delve deeper and talk about how we visually storytell all the time, right? Both and it as a job, right, in the arts, and then how that pairs with literature, and then how just images themselves tell stories. The mirror. The mirror that she talks about is the ability to see oneself beautifully reflected in one or many of their identities. So often I talk to teachers and I say, when you look at your classroom library, who's reflected? So often, or I'll speak to my own experience, and for many experiences of those who identify as being part of the global majority, or often what we call BIPoc, right? People of color. So often, we do not see ourselves portrayed in a beautiful manner, in a joyful manner, just loving life. It doesn't need to be a traumatic event all the time. Yes, those are important, help us learn and grow, but that should not be the only thing that we're consuming. That I see myself so beautifully reflected in all of my Afro-Latinidad, for example, in all of my Blackness, in all of the beautiful facets of my Mexican identity, or in such beautiful facets that people who look like me live in the suburbs, not all of them live in the inner city, for example, right? That nuance, which really isn't nuance, it's, what we call intersectionality, right? For me, as a Black presenting person in the world, how the world interacts with me and how I interact with it is a lot on what I look like. And those are more things that combine. It's not just that I'm Black. It's the fact that I'm Black and I'm a woman, how people interact with me. It's not just that I'm Black and a woman and I'm bilingual that people interact with me this way. It's not just because of the color of my skin. It's the shade of my skin tone, right? Where then colorism comes into play. I'm more palatable to some people versus if I had darker skin. That I speak the way I do, that I've been formally educated. All these things come into my identity and how I interact with the world and how the world interacts with me. And all of those things are still connecting to my culture. So we're talking about this mirror and wanting to make sure we have these beautiful reflections of our students. Equally, we want to have the window. And I'm going to move myself over here. And windows into reality, not just imaginative. And I want to take a moment for this. Very often people talk about, well, this children's book that has a whole bunch of animals in it, right? Like Wild Robot, for example, and they're all working together and they're also different. That's talking about diversity. And I'd say, yes, but what about if we actually have people doing those things, right? Having that conversation. But this is more than this. It's into reality. So what I mean to say is that this window into reality, it's for everyone. So for example, I teach, I'd say primarily a very white, high, like socioeconomic population at my school. That doesn't mean to say there aren't students of color there. It doesn't also mean those other students aren't affluent, but I teach in a pretty affluent area in Los Angeles. It's just as important for my white students to have windows, right? So what the mirror is for me is the window for you. So it's important for everyone to have the other side. And so I clipped this piece so I can read it to you. You don't have to hurt your eyes, but I wanted it to kind of for you to hear this point from Dr. Rudy and Sims Bishop. Children from dominant social groups have always found their mirrors in books, but they too have suffered from the lack of availability of books about others. They need the books as windows into reality, not just on imaginary worlds. They need books that will help them understand the multicultural nature of the world they live in and their place as a member in just one group, as well as their connections to many humans, right? So this is what happens so often. I'm going to make myself big to take up the space. This is what happens so often that we forget about, that people think, well, if those quote unquote children aren't in the room, it's not important. And we know research has shown us the exact opposite, is the fact that my mirror is your window and your mirror is my window. And so often, or so far, for so long inside of history, the mirror has been there for the dominant groups, right? Whether we're talking about gender identity, right? Whether we're talking about sexuality. And to have the opposite is how we build compassion. That's how we build empathy. It's not necessarily that you have to fully understand, but you need to have compassion and an empathy for that other person. And this culturally relevant format aids us in doing it. Okay. That helps us create the sliding door. And the sliding door, I'm going to just pause here, allows us to care about the other individual, right? It allows us to want to know, to delve deep into someone else's history. It's how I feel like if I'm effective, then my student who's not even from that culture is like, I really want to go see that exhibit about so-and-so because I just think it's interesting and valuable and it adds more to my life and helps me understand my own identity and things I do and do not understand. It's this gateway. It's the beautiful passage. It's the real Narnia, so to speak, the real wardrobe to enter into one another's lives in this very safe way through beautiful pages or through a tablet and understand this back and forth. Culturally responsive teaching often starts with the invitation of community and safety, to feel safe. Safety is important. We understand, especially from Zaretta Hammond, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. It's one of my favorite books because it's interactive. So there's like a workbook section inside of it. And what I love about it is that she talks about having to do the work yourself, right? Like before you can teach, you have to know what you're teaching, right? You have to read the book before you teach the book. And she delves deep into talking about creating safe space, that until someone feels safe, until someone feels welcomed, they cannot fully engage. No student, no reader, no person inside of our space, our communities, can fully feel comfortable unless they're welcomed in. Now, what does that look like? It looks like thinking about what safety looks like. So the fight or flight response in the brain is the best part about it. It's like if you're a brainy neurological, like you like reading a lot about science, this book is for you. In the sense that it really helps you realize that if I don't feel safe, like if I don't feel like you respect me, that you care about me, that I feel safe in this space, that you're not going to kick me out because I'm a little louder than maybe other people have been socialized to be in this space. If I don't feel safe, then I can't invest. Then I don't want to stay. My brain is on fight or flight, so I can't fully engage and be present in the moment. So what that looks like inside of my classroom is starting off with like, what do we all need here to be safe, right? how can we make this classroom a space where everyone wants to be? One, and what do you need, right? Like, I feel the need to be heard without being interrupted. I want to say my opinion and have it also be okay if they differ, right? I want to feel like my body is safe in this space, so we should have safe hands. Things that we're familiar with, but that reframing that you have the right to ask for those things is so powerful when creating community. The following books changed my teaching. And I mean changed my teaching as in I found them after school. I found them after graduate school. They fell in my lap, and this isn't even all of them. This is just a few. And they asked me to grow. And seeing myself, the first book where I feel like I saw both true sides of parts of my cultural identity, yes, is the book called Homegrown by Bell Hooks and Amalia Mesa Vines. And this book is these two exceptional educators talking. They said that they created it by first having dialogue with each other and they just recorded themselves. And so the large majority of the book is literally just their like recorded conversations. And their conversations are talking about art in their homes. They're talking about their culture and the fact that they entered the classroom with a sense of knowledge about art. They said, well, we weren't studying art, but we did have a sense of what art was, right? What are your resources, right? Our sources. And they were citing their sources, their primary sources. They were saying, well, on the wall of my home, Amalia Mesa Vines, well, both of them were saying, well, due to my, not only my culture, but my religious and faith background that I was born into, I had images from the Bible, right? I had lots of religious images that were in my home. So that was my first understanding of art. And when we think about building critical thinkers, when we think about visual critical language, at least for me as an art teacher, there's so much there inside of all the paintings that we often have reproductions of, right? Like famous Renaissance paintings. Those are often what we consider, especially before we even decenter the European gaze, as it's still being super important to when we talk about art, how we view things, the visual path of a piece of work, the deep symbolism that's inside of something. And so they were talking about the importance of art being in their home, and understanding art was important even if they weren't making it. And then entering the art classroom. And if the art classroom, they start dialoguing, if it was a safe space for them, or if it wasn't, what was expected of them in that space, their relationships with their teachers, and how their culture informed that, as in informed how the teacher interacted with them and how they interacted with their teacher. Zaretta Hammond talks about, what does she say? It's a beautiful moment. She gives an example about culture to try and help understand. And she says that we're unaware of how much we've been conditioned to focus on a dominant culture, right? And this is why culturally responsive teaching, why culturally relevant pedagogy is so important. So she says, think about the classroom setting. So there's a little boy, his name is Johnny, and the teacher's talking. So the teacher's instructing right now. And Johnny gets up and starts sharpening a pencil. And she goes, Johnny, would you like to stop sharpening your pencil? And he looks at her and he says, no, and goes back to sharpening. Johnny gets in trouble and gets sent to the principal's office. Johnny happens to be, let's say, a Black or an African American child. And when Johnny's asked why he's in trouble, he's like, I don't know. And he goes, well, what happened? And he goes, she asked me if I wanted to stop sharpening my pencil. And I answered her and I said, no. Zaretta Hammond talks about how there was an already prescribed answer. And many of us know this due to conditioning inside the classroom. Many of us know this because when we think about Brown versus the Board of Education, when we think about teachers and the lack of diversity in teachers right after that happens, the removal of Black teachers inside the environment, we subscribed in a sense the culture of the classroom to be very what she calls like a WASP, like an upper middle class understanding. So we're talking about direct directives versus indirect directives, yes, or what some people call passive aggressive. So many people would say that they knew the answer. So I might hold for that, but like the answer to the question, right? So everyone knew that the thing he shouldn't have done, many of us, right? It was like, you stop sharpening your pencil. It wasn't actually a question. It was formed in a question, but it was meant to tell him to stop sharpening your pencil. Like that's not okay in the moment. But if you in your home are spoke to in direct directives, like, please stop doing that. Please don't sharpen your pencil right now. Wait till later. That's a direct directive. Asking a question when you already know what you want the answer to be is an indirect directive. So culture, right? How we're raised in our homes, how we're spoken to becomes so important. And that's why this work is incredible. There's so many other pieces to this. If you haven't read these books, I highly recommend, particularly the top two, and then Teaching to Transgress by Bell Hooks. We just recently celebrated or honored her birthday. And Art on My Mind, Visual Politics, I want to say was the first time I experienced a Black woman talking about Black art. And I'm a reader and I love reading articles and I like reading journals and I like reading books. And I have my largest collection is, yes, art books from museums. That's my love. But the way in which this dialogue happened, again, this idea of the mirror, and I mean the mirror in also the voice of the author themselves. Yes, not just what I'm visually seeing. I mean, seeing myself fully as in I want to be careful here. There's no one way to be Black, for example, but someone living a Black experience and then talking about art and then taking apart art in a critical format that I understand from my academic study is special. That's what I mean. And this beautiful opportunity to see myself in this different format. Then we got books that changed my life. I'm going to put myself up here and maybe a little smaller. These books that changed my life allowed me to see myself and to have a lot of windows into things I didn't know. I didn't stumble upon Black feminism and Black feminist theory until after graduate school. So oftentimes when people are like, I want to read your graduate thesis, I'm like, please don't read it. I didn't have enough information at the time. I didn't know what to look for. I didn't know what to search for. But these books that I'm sharing now have been essential to my learning as an adult. My oldest son happens to be on the spectrum. And I didn't understand until I read this book, until I found the voice of people who had autism, who were everywhere on the spectrum of that, and were talking about their lived experiences. And it's made me a better mother. I don't think I understood the full capacity of love and loving, or the ability to think through my own life experiences until I read all about love and hearing people talk, hearing bell hooks take apart what we assume love is, what we know love songs are about, to actually thinking about how our culture informs that, how our identities inform that, how our socioeconomic, our upbringing, like all these small pieces inform our concepts about love. Borderlands, La Frontera by Gloria Anzaldúa talk about the first time I heard someone who was someone who was queer and who identified being Latinx in any format speaking to me, sharing their opinion, not just talking about the duality of identity of being from one country but not another, feeling like you don't belong in either, walking a strange border that nobody sees, but then to add to that this aspect of sexual identity into play. Community as Rebellion, A Syllabus for Surviving Academia as a Woman of Color. I cried during that entire book because I saw my own lived experience as one of few in the room in all of my academic experiences. So not that I didn't realize it now, but I can't keep holding back the want to say in a very deep level how important books are to our lives and to education, that they come together as early learners, of course, but then also us as people, that to not have the mirror, to not have the window, I feel that and think that our development, and we know this, our development as people is stunted. So it's so important to have all these books to help move us forward. I'm going to touch a little bit more upon Black feminism and Black feminist theory, which grounds my work and also keeps coming back to all these concepts and understanding and theories of culture and the pedagogical formats that I'm talking about, or frameworks, excuse me. What is Black feminist theory? Black women both shape the world and are shaped by it. They create their own Black feminist theory. They come to feminist theory and practice out of the oppression they experience as people who are poor and Black and women. Black feminism has evolved historically over centuries outside of traditional white feminine roles, white social institutions, and white feminist cultural theory. The foremothers of Black feminist theory are right here. Patricia Hill Collins, Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, she's the one who's coined intersectionality for us. Dr. Joan Morgan, Dr. Joni Boyd Acuff, Dr. Gloria J. Wilson, and Dr. Bell Hooks. Particularly for me, Joni Boyd Acuff and Dr. Gloria Wilson are there as my foremothers, particularly when we talk about art education and when we talk about race and art, when we talk about identity in art. These two women delve deep into those conversations in the depths of academia, in terms of papers, and then also with providing different resources and understandings of how to create this work. Black feminist theory basics. I'm closing my face right now, so hopefully my voice is enough. When we talk about Black feminist theory basics, we're talking about some key concepts that I want to brush over. There's no way that in this time can I give you the full understanding of that, but I hope it piques your interest and you see how it synthesizes deeply into understanding culturally relevant pedagogy and the power of the mirror and the sliding door and the window that Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop talks about. That multiple truths can coexist, right? We see this oftentimes. We'll hear the main protagonist, and then there's some beautiful books that then show us the opinion of another person. And so we're walking the same experience back and forth, but two truths can coexist. Experience as a form of knowledge that no, you don't have to have every degree in the world. Your lived experience is valid. And we see that so often when we are listening to others, when we're listening to survivors, for example, when we're listening to young children just tell us about their day, for example, that maybe, you don't have to, and oftentimes you don't have to have a degree in something, etc. But you know what it's like to live in your body, right? With all those identities forming and at odds with each other, depending on the environment that you're in. That community is essential. And that community to me is the beginning and end all of learning. That if we don't feel we are in community with our students, with our peers, with those who are coming to learn from us, we are unable to reach them. Emphasis on empowerment and self-love. All these things can happen inside of books, but all these things need to be thought of when we're thinking about the community, right? That action through practice and dialogue and activism are key inside of this. Is there the book on environmentalism? And then maybe what's the way we can make an art piece to call attention to these things? What's the way we all can work together to then let our community know this is important? Or how can we then connect to another organization to make this a larger moment for us of building relationships to one another and then doing something, in fact, for the world outside of ourselves, and valuing creativity and imagination. What that looks like, how do we take practice into praxis? Black feminism is a praxis that connects theory to practice and practice to theory. So it goes back and forth, having this idea and trying it, and sometimes being okay with a failure because it's not really a failure because we learned something, that growth mindset that is ebbing and flowing inside of us. We address intersectionality. We talk about the multiple identities and how each of them can impact oppression, and then at the same time also elevate us in different spaces in the room. And what do we do with that? How do we interact with our community members that way? It moves beyond just representation, that it's more than just adding, Black women into your curriculum, or Black girls' voices, or brown girls' voices, or one queer story into the room. that it's thinking about how does that author come in, or how do we talk about that illustrator? How do we bring those people who are in our communities, artists who look like that, artists who have those identities, and we continue to humanize their experience and to expand that window to make it a sliding door in real space and time. The inclusion of those marginalized perspectives, rethinking how we do this work. There's so much there, and oftentimes it does seem overwhelming, but it's also these beautiful, rich opportunities. I want to take a moment to talk about probably the youngest book that's in my classroom that I adore, that I wonder if anyone knows, but it's called The Ultimate Art Museum, and it's by Farron Gibson. And I adore this book. And I adore this book because it has an intersectional approach to talking about art, and it's user friendly, and it's fun, and it's diverse, and it takes apart the art museum in a completely different way. So I teach 7th grade right now, and this book helps me be culturally relevant in my pedagogy, I guess, when I think about it that way, or the easiest way to frame it inside of our frameworks and all these nuggets of vocabulary words that are super essential. And then I would say that it opens up and it literally folds open. It takes up almost the whole table. And there's different galleries, and it's broken up into different points of time. And you can move forward and you can move backwards. And it's just glorious. And I'm finding it's just sparking this love. And then This Is What I Know About Art by Kimberly Drew has been a really beautiful way for my older students, my 8th and 9th graders, to have a dialogue with someone. This book opens up where she's literally talking to you and thanking you for reading it. And she talks about that she didn't know much about museums and art and how she stumbles her way through. And inside of it, you are seeing her intersectional experience come to life inside of that as a Black queer woman inside of the space. I hope that I've inspired you to continue looking for mirrors, windows, and sliding doors inside of your spaces, to think about how you can provide that and link art and art making and building community. And I think now, am I right, Kelly, that I got 10 minutes so that there's question times and conversation?
Yep. So
Okay,
go ahead.
I'm going to stop my screen share.
Okay. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and I will relay those to Flavia, same as we did during the author panel this morning. Let's see. Flavia, while I'm waiting for that to come through, I just want to thank you for sharing your joy, your passion. It is so obvious how passionate you are about what it is you do, and changing the world around you through the communities that you have created and who you are working with. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your words. And I know that all of the books you shared, I'm sure people were frantically writing down some of the names of those books. A group of book lovers wanting to add to our collections and ensuring that we are creating spaces for all children, infancy through their teen years, to feel safe and seen in the libraries. So thank you. And now I will ask you some questions.
That sounds good. Thank you so much. Yes, and I can send you a book list, Kelly, if you'd like. And I also, through Adding Voices, I have a Patreon, and like monthly, or at least now I think it's starting to go more bi-quarterly because life happens.
Right.
But I always have like a new book list of art books that are connecting. There's some that are for the teacher for learning, and then some for the classroom. So I'm happy to like share what I have there that way with
That
everyone.
would be wonderful. This is an incredible group of youth librarians who are always looking for ways to connect to their communities. And so we would love to get that list from you, and we will absolutely post it on the CLEL website with your permission. I know you created the document, so if we have permission for that, then we will do so. Actually, you know what, Flavia, there are no questions. There are just lots of thank you. This was very inspiring. You're amazing. Oh, here's a question. Yes, you have been well loved.
Oh,
Thank
thank
you
you.
for this. So Melanie says, you are amazing. What do you think about the books being banned and specifically Black titles that are being challenged? Like I Am Every Good Thing being pulled because it celebrates Black boys.
It's scary and it's sad because I think when we understand how long it took to get that book, to have that book removed, I don't know how you can't see that as anti-Blackness. I don't know how it cannot be seen as wanting to silence an entire generation of young Black boys who should be proud in who they are and not be afraid of who they are, right? We know that about the age of 8, I think it's like after about 5 years or 6 years old, young Black boys are considered dangerous. Like they are perceived as physically dangerous. That also goes for like other brown youth as well, but particularly Black boys. So I think to not celebrate them, to not create those safe spaces with them, um, unfortunately pushes one deep dominant cultural narrative, that they are dangerous, right? And when we talk about the mirror, right, and the window, it takes away a really important window for, I would say, like the dominant white culture at large. But yeah, but not, and the beautiful mirror that's there. So it's concerning, and I'm grateful for those who share banned books. They're essential to our world.
Um, someone, Karina is saying, thank you for this amazing talk. Do you have a website where we can read all about your thoughts and share them to support the BIPoc community?
No, I don't have a website. I mean, I have the website for the community I create, which is Adding Voices for Art Educators, which our conference is coming up in November. It's in Philadelphia. It's hosted by Moore College of Art and Design. So I can put those things inside, but otherwise I spend most of my time busy being a mom and teaching
And a
full time.
teacher.
Yes, I'm a full-time teacher. So I teach 7th, 8th, and 9th grade visual arts. And then I also teach 7th, 8th, and 9th grade Introduction to Contemporary Dance. And then when I'm not doing that, I'm running a conference, a biannual conference. And then when I'm not doing that, I'm taking care of 2 really wonderful young people as a single parent. So I'm full in life, but those would be addingvoices.com. I think it's just direct messaging right now, but I'll send them out that way, I think. And then I talk a lot more or share these ideas a lot more on my Instagram. And it's changed to being Flavia ZW_art. But I
Can
talk a
you
lot.
put that, can you put your Instagram in the chat
I
for
put it in the
members?
chat, but I'm only in direct chat. I don't
Can you
see.
change, so go ahead and use the drop-down menu and change to meeting group chat.
Okay, hold on, closing.
And then we have, it looks like 4 more questions for you.
Oh, I love
Oh,
that. I'm
I
glad
see
you
adding
said
voices. That's made it. And so has your, oh, it's made it. I just couldn't see it.
that. Are you
Sorry.
sure? It says it's main room. Is it in there? Okay,
Yes,
it's okay.
you're good.
Is it in there? I think so. All
No,
right.
it
It's
was
inside those
my problem.
places. Yeah, and then there's also my Patreon where I think that's where I talk more because I have newsletters and things like that. And that's often where I share more of my thoughts and opinions about those things.
Awesome. It looks like I can condense these into 3 more questions.
Okay.
So Melody is asking, what is one book or experience that you wish children or your own children could encounter in the library to help them develop their sense of belonging and self-worth?
Ooh, that's a difficult one. What's one book?
Or is there a book that you have read to your children that you've chosen specifically to love and celebrate them that you would hope other children would see?
I chose a book, no, but it's still connected. I chose a book for my children to see a very intentional window into another world. And I won it actually at the banned book, and it's like sitting on the kitchen table because we've been reading it. It's called The Prince and the Knight. Um, it's by Daniel, I think it's words by Daniel Hack, pictures by Stevie Lewis. And it's about a prince and a knight who fall in love. And
Mm,
that was intentional for both of my children, just to have
wonderful.
a window,
Yeah.
because that's really important to me. So yeah,
Um,
I think that celebration and the ability to celebrate, I mean, for how big our land of Disney is, princesses are, I
Yeah.
think that equally like princes and knights should be celebrated. One of my very good friends, I picked that book and we were just sitting next to each other reading it. Happens to be a gay man, and he was literally like in tears, being like, I needed
Mm,
this as a kid. So it's when that happens to us as books, it's beautiful. Any of them about curly hair,
mm.
book about curly hair. I read a lot of books about curly hair, specifically to my daughter. It's hard to have curly
Melody,
hair.
Melody, who asked the question, shared that she loves that book that you just shared. Do you have some insight on how library staff can continue to introduce doors and windows into story times while in communities that can sometimes express strong reactions to texts they feel resistance towards?
Mm. So is this like when we have library reading time? Is that, am I correct
Yes,
in
like
saying,
story
like,
time in the
story
libraries.
time?
Mhm.
I think that I don't want to use the word subversive. I think there's just a way to be welcoming. It's whatever the activity is. So I know like there's the we're going to read the book, but then what's the activity with the book, right? And
Mhm.
is it the coloring page? Is it words that connect to it? Is it having circle time or bringing in somebody else also to have that dialogue is something I think about a lot, or a community mural that just touches upon the fact there's something more simplistic inside the book. Does that make sense? So
Mhm.
that there's an additional want or interest into connecting, where it might just find that you interact with somebody else and then it's a humanized moment, right? Because what
Mhm.
we read inside of a book is just like this small snippet until we then meet a real character in real life. Does that make I hope
Yeah,
that makes sense.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Another question that has come in is being a person of color, Native American, I have come across books that often portray traumatic events, but there aren't enough books about joy. What joyful books can you suggest?
Oh, I would definitely have to go literally to like I wouldn't have enough time in this moment, but I think it's finding the joy. There's one that's like We Are the Water Protectors, I
Mm,
think.
yes. Uh-huh.
That one's really
Water protector.
beautiful. Just when I'm thinking about particularly the Native American experience, We Are Turtle Island. I lean towards those books and I really don't read Thanksgiving books to my children. Like, do we celebrate on that day? Yes. And do I slowly take apart that day? Yes, but in small pieces. But I think yeah, it's difficult to find the joy also when we know inside of curriculum, like the colonial, like, when you look, at least in California, when I look at the kindergarten, like history,
Yeah.
it'll be the colonial begin, like colonial, whatever. And I'm like, like, what's happening? So I think it's providing those experiences or expanding upon them. Like the history of color, for example, I think I center Indigenous storytelling so much in that just by talking about the history of color. And I do that. I don't even have like, I mean, there's moments of books like The Color Red, The Color This. I'm thinking about especially for younger littles, like what I do with my daughter who's 4, um, and my son who's 8. But moving that even to the 7th grade classroom, where do we get our colors from? We get them from the earth, we get them from plants, and we get them from animals, right? So we have earth pigments, plant pigments, right? And animal pigments. And so how can we talk about the beginning of how we made color, right? So when we're talking about Lascaux and the caves, when we're talking about how we get paint today, we learned that from indigenous people. We learned that as human beings ourselves, painting on walls, trying to understand the world. Like we have the Bloombo's caves, right, in South Africa. That's where we find the abalone shell. That's the first time we started mixing paint as human beings. So I find different ways to lead with joy and then supplement books that way from an author. Or that's where I think you bring in the indigenous person, whether that's on a Zoom into the library or inside your community, because indigenous folks are everywhere. We just don't know where to pull from them, I think, to find moments of bringing joy, right? And pushing a little bit beyond um, that surface level culture that we talk about. And I think art making and beating and understanding why those things exist really have those capabilities.
Thank you. One last question, and then we will let you go. We have taken more of your time than we requested. How much study has been done on the absence of non-white faces in media or books that you may know about? This person says, I grew up in a diverse state, but saw none of the diversity reflected in books or other media in my youth.
Will you repeat the first part of that question again for me,
Yeah,
please?
absolutely. And I'm adding to your knowledge, how much study has been done on the absence of non-white faces in media and books?
I'm sure it's there. I don't know the answers to that question. I always normalize for my students. It's okay to say you don't know
Yeah,
something. I
absolutely.
don't know, but I will say in thinking about my own experience to watching cartoons with my children, like Molly Denali. Like I love PBS Kids. I'm a big PBS Kids like advocate, but seeing like Molly Denali or seeing Spirit Rangers, that's on Netflix, but seeing these shows, I don't know if they're books. I'm sorry, librarians. I should look into that. But anyways, my point being is that seeing these shows now and my children think nothing of it. And I mean that in the way that they're like, oh, that's super cool. They're like, Mom, did you know about the Chumash tribe? And like, they're just giving me all these tidbits and like, they're teaching me. And
Mm,
so I think whether or not I have an actual study, I have me myself, like what I would come from that Black feminist perspective of like my lived experience. And I know just from being a parent where I'm like, no one was talking to me like this. There was not this, right? Like low stakes, you're just home watching, like having your screen time, right? And being fed meaningful stories of others, seeing like these moments of windows that just were happening, if that makes sense. But I'm
absolutely.
sure there's studies. I'm sure of it. I'm sure there's some grad student, PhD student right now who are like on
Working
it.
on it.
I just don't know what those are, but I'd say delve deep into that. But art has definitely changed that way. We can see that for sure.
Thank you.
No.
I want to say thank you one more time for this incredible keynote. Lots of messages in the chat, how wonderful this was. They're leaving so inspired. This was a wonderful way to end our first day together. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for inspiring us. And please know that what you've shared today will be a ripple effect and will continue in the work that we all do with children in our libraries. So thank you, Flavia, again. We wish you all the best. And if there's anything else you want to share with us, just send it my way and I'll make sure it gets on the CLEL website.
Absolutely. I'm going to send that book list out, especially I think in terms of that beautiful pairing of artist and artwork, and then all the other ones that I think also are helpful for like our own individual learning. Thank you so much. This was amazing. I'm so, so, so grateful. And so great to have your face in person.
Thanks.
It is. It's nice to like see you and meet you
Yes.
guys.
I've tried to stay hidden as much as possible today.
Oh, no, take up all the space that you need sometimes. Important. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you,
I
Flavia.
appreciate you. Thank you for all you do. Truly, you are gifts to the world. Thank you for all that you do. All right, take care.
Bye. Thanks,
Bye.
Flavia.
Keep doing the hard work. It's worth it.
You too.
Yes. Bye.
So thank you, Clell, for an amazing first day. Thank you for staying with us. I hope that you enjoyed today as much as I know I did as a participant and getting to listen to different people share their gifts with us. We look forward to another great day tomorrow. We're starting right away at 11 a.m. Colorado time with the tutu teacher, which I think will also be an incredible keynote. Thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Have a great night.